Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on Deborah Kobylt Live, and I hope you had an amazing Thanksgiving weekend. I know we did. Everybody's home safely, so it was just a terrific time. We have a very interesting guest on the phone with us right now, Michael Hageloh. He wrote an incredible book, Live from Cupertino, and he talks all about his time there at Apple, where he closed nearly $1 billion in sales for Apple. Incredible. He's going to give us some anecdotes about Steve Jobs and what it was like working in the environment there. This is a and what he learned also. Terrific book, Live from Cupertino. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us.
Thank you, Deborah, for having me. It's always fun to talk to a pro like yourself.
Oh, thank you. I'll take it. Tell me first, Michael, briefly, why did you decide to write the book?
So it's the first book written by an Apple insider, and it's really the first book to prove everything you think you know about Apple is wrong.
Oh.
I wrote it to clear up all the untruths, if you will, from all the other books that are out there from folks on the outside looking in. I was an insider looking out. And I really, at the core, Apple wasn't even a company with Steve. It was a band. And before Apple, I was a drummer. So everyone thought Steve was an innovator. He wasn't. I looked at it through the lens of music. And that's why I wrote the book. I wanted to tell that insider story.
Well, it's kind of interesting, if you will. The resurgence of Apple really was because of music, because of the iPod, right?
No doubt. The music player built the company. I mean, we were 2 weeks away from going out of business, and Steve returned. And, of course, the innovation, if you will, that was inside the company, the music that was there, he brought to the forefront. I mean, he was, and people often say that Steve was a master innovator. I have a premise that he was an innovator, but his real genius was selling. He was so good at selling, nobody even saw him do it.
Well,
and that's the life I led there.
Well, we talked about that a little bit on the phone. Remember, I think he knew what people needed or wanted before people even knew about it. Don't you think? I mean, that's what innovators are. They know stuff before you do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt he was able to bring those ideas to a place. It's funny, people ask me all the time, what's your pitch? And I tell them, what's your elevator pitch? And I tell them, look, first, before you even have an elevator pitch, you got to know who's in the elevator. And Steve was just an expert at knowing who was in the elevator and how to bring new people into this elevator called Apple. And he did this with consummate selling of ideas. I mean, let's just back up. Let's just look at this briefly. In that, here's a man who went to AT&T, told them to forget about the 56 phones they were selling, and they should sell this brand new idea called the iPhone. And even though we were 7% of the worldwide tech sale market at that point, and I'd say the rest is history.
What year was this?
That's master salesmanship.
What year was this?
2001.
That is incredible. What has happened in 18 years. It's just remarkable.
Absolutely.
And let me tell you something. If there's a fire in the house, first my kids and dogs, and then I'm running out the door with my phone, because my phone is everything. It's your computer. We all know that. The computer, the camera, it's everything. And he was the first to really design that and know that we would need it. It's incredible. And kudos to AT&T for just sort of believing in him in that way.
Well, I don't know that I wasn't there, but there are a number of articles that have been written about it, which ring true to me. I don't think that was an easy pickup for them. There's actually a story in Forbes that talks about AT&T's chief information officer, when he heard about the Apple deal, sent Steve an email saying, oh, here's a book of our 100-plus standards, everything that has to do to plug up to our network. And he reportedly sent the email back with 3 letters, WTF. So there's some chutzpah there, there's some magic, there's some innovation, and most importantly, what I got out of my years there was their salesmanship. I mean, we're all selling. Let's face it. Your kids are master salespeople. The dog is a salesperson. Your husband, your wife, to get you to eat out is a salesperson. If you're raising money for your church, your little league, you name it, these are all selling.
Right. And that is the subtext to your book, what you learned from being at Apple all these years, which is very interesting because it is applicable to anything you do in life. As you said, if the dog could read, this is a perfect book for the dog because it shows how to negotiate. Well, how to negotiate.
I bet your dog can read. I bet he can read. I bet that's a talented dog. No?
No, but thank you for saying that.
Okay.
No, he's almost the other direction. But, for real, as we talked about, this book would give you skills applicable to anything. And that's what I love about it. It's very interesting. So let's back up a little bit. You you answered an ad for Apple, right? Back when you were living in Tampa and you were working, where were you working back then?
I was a roadie.
You were a roadie.
I was a musician. I was the classic unload the VW van, play the gig, load the van, hope that your bar tab is less than they're paying you that night. That kind of world. I was a drummer. Mm-hmm. I was picking up gigs. I was doing roadie work. I happened to be working a gig in Tampa, and I was in the green room and picked up a newspaper and looked at a thing called a want ad. I know it was a Wall Street Journal, and this crazy little company called Apple Computer wanted somebody with some particular software skills, which I had, and the rest is history.
Right, because you had worked in radio before that, right? So you had some tech skills. So you worked with them in a technical way, right, doing some of their technical stuff. But then you changed over and you did sales, right? And what kind of sales did you do for Apple?
Well, I joined them as an engineer, right. And I was responsible for taking care of two sales guys, and in a specific vertical area called higher education in the university world. And I'd hung out with these guys and been their support, if you will, for about a year. And I said to myself, geez, I can do this. And, I was, again, still a drummer. What did I know about sales or business? I was kind of an introvert. I didn't think I could be the front guy for selling. But in watching and observing these two, they were two different personalities, and I was able to figure out that, man, maybe I can give it a try. And again, I gave it a try and never went back. I've enjoyed the ability to tell the story, and it's as much a part of my life now as the technical part. And I will say I did remain a little technical still, so never hurts, right?
It's interesting because Steve always said, you don't have to sell anything. These sell themselves. Was that true when you walked in the door to sell products to schools?
No, not at all. The whole idea that these things sold themselves was really kind of crazy in the sense that people had standards, they had ways that they wanted to operate. You had to take somebody on a new vision of why they wanted to join with this product, whether it was back in the day the Mac, which is still around today, mm-hmm. It's still a lovely personal computer, or the iPod. I'll never forget working in the university world with the iPod. I had the vision that maybe we could have academic content on it besides music. Now, right. Today, as you and I are talking, that's like, oh, of course you can. But somebody had to make the leap of faith that you could do that before we got to today. And that's the visionary selling, if you will, that Steve was so masterful at. He took you on a mental journey, and by the time you got to where he wanted you to go, his products were conveniently there.
Yeah, you were sold.
And that's something that and just think about it from a music point of view. That's what a great orchestra, a great band does. They take you on a journey. You forget you're in the room. You're just moving with them through the music. Well, and hopefully when you leave, you're happy with it.
You saw the near collapse of Apple, and then when Steve came back, the surge. And basically that was because of the iPod. This was his idea to do this? Because he came back with probably fresh with ideas on how, right?
Yeah, actually the first product really was the iMac, the all-in-one device. That was his first vision. We had at that time 20 plus products in the product line.
Right.
And when Steve returned, he said we're going to do four things: 2 consumer products really well, 2 professional products really well. So 26 minus 4, 22 products dropped off overnight.
And what
And
were
this
those?
was that laser focus, that he had and he brought to us. Go ahead.
Right. No, I was going to say, and those 4 were the 2 commercial and the 2. What were they?
They were both. They were all iMacs. They were just in different configurations of iMac.
I got you.
That was that all-in-one, that kind of breakthrough. Because before the iMac, you had a monitor and a CPU, and this was that all-in-one looking thing that everybody was like, "What is that? That can't be a computer." Where I can't tell you how many times people asked me when they saw the iMac, they said, "Where's the computer?" Well, it's in there.
It's inside.
No, that's the monitor. Where's the computer? Oh, it's in there. So that was a breakthrough product for us.
Yeah, it's kind of like your brain. Where's your brain? It's in your head. The same thing with the computer. The brain is inside the picture, the computer. I love that. I remember that when it first came out, thinking, wait a minute, hello, where's the rest of it? So yeah, that was definitely very revolutionary. Well,
it was a little, just one thing though, Deborah, it was a little problematic in my world.
Why?
Quick side note. Well, they came in different colors, right? They came in blue and red and others. And I'll never forget someone at the University of Florida, and you Gators out there will appreciate this. Someone looked at me and said, "That's not Gator orange, that's Tennessee orange." So I had a difficult time selling that one on campus.
That's a great story. What was he like? You told me a few anecdotes, and I know people would love to hear about what he was like in a meeting. You told me one, and I really like this. I think he called a meeting and said, "Do you have any questions?"
The company car one?
Yep.
Is that the one?
Yep.
Yeah. So let's just step back just 1 second. I mean, let's face it. He was Mick Jagger. He was a rock star, right? Yet he was difficult. I mean, he parked in the handicapped space out at Cupertino. He didn't take selfies well with customers. He actually got up and walked away on one of my team members' deals. I mean, he didn't have a license plate. Go ahead.
Wait a minute. Didn't that guy just spend $60 million on
$69 million with us, and he walked up to Steve in the cafeteria on property and said, "Hey, will you take a picture with me? I just spent $69 million with you." And Steve pushed his tea away from himself. He was sitting there alone, got up, turned around, walked away. I mean, he's a rock star, right? That's just kind of the way. But one of my favorite ones, we were all in a meeting in California, and he had come in to talk with us. And first thing he asked, are there any questions? And someone on my team got up and said, "Steve, we all get company cars," which we did. We all drove company cars, including Steve drove a company car. And there are no eco-friendly cars on the list. Can we get an eco-friendly car? Steve looked at us. He looked around, came closer, and he said, "You guys get company cars?"
Oh, no.
Well, that took 6 months of accounting to clear that noise up. So, it was like working with rock stars, again, a Mick Jagger, if you will, that it was very different, but it was very rewarding. And what I took away from him was stagecraft. I took away from him that here's a guy who could control an audience of millions with nothing, no instrument, just himself. And I finally found out that stagecraft was his ability to sell.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously exuded a great deal of confidence, but also, may I just say, arrogance. I mean, the fact that and look, great people can very often be that way. We know that. But the very fact that he would park in handicap when he wasn't, or the fact that he, handled himself in that meeting, which I thought was an intimidation sort of a tactic to do with people. It's like, well, great, now I'm going to take it away. Or in any other given way, even
I think it was a surprise. And that just proves don't ask rock stars questions.
Yeah, I guess. But you're right. He was a rock star and he took full advantage of it, I'm not sure he had to be that way, but it doesn't matter. That was Steve Jobs, to the very, very end. So what's interesting is, let's look a little bit into the book. I love the way you ended each chapter. Wait, where is it? Let me open up to one.
Let me guess. Excruciating.
I love it. At the very end, people, because very often an author will sum up their chapter, and you would sum it up with the heading very often, Michael's excruciating to-do list. I just think that's great. Excruciating. Why excruciating?
Yes. So early on, this book is the product of two failed manuscripts prior, because it was a labor of love, if you will. I knew I had something to say, so I thought I'd write a book. I had to write a book to figure out what I wanted to say. But everybody was driving me to, give us the 3 secrets. Give us the 4 secrets. Give us the 5 easy steps to be just like that.
Yep.
And the reality is there aren't 5 easy steps. There are 5 excruciatingly hard steps, or 7 excruciatingly hard steps. To operate at that level, including the level I operated at, you had to really work at it. It's not something you can't do. Everybody can do it. It's just that you have to pay attention to those excruciatingly hard things to do.
Yeah. But you know what? Isn't that just like we were talking? That's just life. That's what you got to do in life. And Steve Jobs was the pro at it. For example, we talk in chapter 1, Steve Jobs rehearsed everything, that we would see him up on stage talking out to the audience, and it just looked like he showed up. But what did you tell me? He was rehearsing that ad nauseum, right?
It was rehearsed. And likewise with us, we were forced to rehearse. There was never you were not allowed to take anything, if you will, for granted. It's funny. It's probably why the best training I ever received at Apple was improv training. And that at least allowed you to handle the problems that weren't rehearsed, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't want to paint a picture that we were just these automatons that just going step by step. No, but you had to know things inside and out so that you could operate in a very competitive and still very competitive world.
Yeah, but I love that you're talking about improv. That's in chapter 6, where you say when things change on a dime, improvise. But it's true. But you can't just improvise and not know your material. You can improvise,
That's right.
I think, when you do know your material. So
yeah, absolutely. You're so right there. I mean, that is the critical. That's what a lot of people miss about improv. Is that you do know things backwards and forwards, and you have if we're talking in the music arena, you have the skills, you have the musicianship to do improv well. Improv is one of those great things that looks super simple, and it's super difficult.
I've done it, so I know it is really difficult. And in fact, my next guest is talking about improv. She wrote a book about it, which is and pretty much it's about improv for people in business. In fact, it's called Improv for Writers. So it's interesting you said that. But back to your book. So I love that he did that, and he said, "Don't pitch, know, and adopt." I think that's really terrific. Also, you're telling a story when you go out and sell, right? And he was always telling
Absolutely.
a story to the point where people were so riveted they needed what he was selling. I love that.
His stagecraft was the legend. He built this through I finally figured out the stagecraft was selling that built the legend. And it's the same as if you look at it in the music industry. Let's take back to Mick Jagger. I mean, here's someone who is deeply schooled, London School of Economics. He's a very different business person than he is on stage. And Steve was that very different business person. I mean, having been responsible for a dollar amount, you had to deliver, right? You had to get those numbers, but you still had to do that I'll never forget, I had a boss once that said, there are only 3 things that matter: profitable, ethical, and legal. And that's just kind of the way we operated. That was the only way we operated.
Listening. You talk about listening. I mean, if that's not one of the most important elements of any selling or or anything you do. Just listen. And so many of us don't,
Yeah.
right? We jump in. I
Right.
jump in.
Totally. And that's not hearing. That's listening. And you know as well as I do, hearing and listening are two different things.
Absolutely. But there's so much to learn from your book. You talk about soul. I love how you compare everything and bring it back around to music, the orchestration of all this. I love that. And basically,
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say, as I said early on, Apple, the Steve and the Apple I knew wasn't a company; it was a band,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of jam going on, and there were a lot of great players who had great skill. But once our maestro returned, once that orchestra leader got up in front, we were able to go to a new level. And having been there when we were 2 weeks away from going out of business. You could see it. You could see that we didn't have our melody together. I hung it on music because it's close to my heart. Music's a part of most everybody's life. They have a favorite song. And I think that the core components of making music were the identical components of building one of the world's most profitable companies.
Very clever. And also, it's music that sort of helped get them back on track with the iPod.
Indeed.
And
No doubt there.
Yeah, and I love what you said. Everybody has a song inside of them, whether they do sales or whatever it is that they're doing. And if you follow that, your passion, the melody, you'll get to where you're going. Because again, this book, people, is actually a lot about what you learned through working at Apple. And then anyone can apply it. The veterinarian, which is quite interesting. Tell me another story or anecdote about Steve that somebody really might not know, where you had a real inner look.
Did you realize that the Apple stores were the product of our products weren't being represented properly by our dealers, and we had to be able to tell our own story? And I'll never forget when Steve sat there and told us that we were going to open up our first store, and everybody, particularly people, now I was not responsible for, quote, Apple dealers out in the real world. Those weren't mine.
Right.
Other people in the room were. But you could see the fright on their face. You could see, well, what does that mean for my local computer store? Well, what it meant was that if they wouldn't represent the products the way Apple wanted, Apple was going to represent them their way in the Apple store. And the Palo Alto store, I happened to be in Cupertino that day. I wasn't going to the store. I was at another meeting. But the first customer, quote unquote, of that store was the guy named Steve Jobs. So you can see that he had a real focus on those. So I can't even imagine having a customer like that come in the door.
Well, look, it's good enough for Steve Jobs, right? It had now has people lining up around the door. He believed in it, and so would everybody else. But what was smart about that was he had his own store, but you could still pick up an iPhone at AT&T or Verizon or any place. So that was really brilliant. Very, very smart move. And his intuition.
Yeah, and
business.
It was definitely a controversial move. There were a lot of people that didn't see the wisdom. Of course, today's Apple Store, the wisdom is built into hundreds of stores all around the country with thousands and thousands of energetic people representing the Apple brand as employees. And it's just a great thing to see. I lived in Manhattan for quite a while, and every time you go by the Fifth Avenue store, there's no shortage of customers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I find this just a terrific book because of what I learned and what I learned about negotiating and selling. And you learn from the best, but also I think instinctively you knew what to do over there at Apple. Anything else you'd like to tell us? This is a terrific book. I am going to really implore people to please go get this, Live from Cupertino. It's just, I love how you weave in lessons and very applicable and easy to read.
I thought about that, about this interview with you in particular, and looking at your history, and I thought to myself, there are many great CEOs in the world, and probably many of them who listen to your program.
Okay, I'll take it.
There are very few Steves. There are many great musicians. There are few Mick Jaggers. The real difference between Steve and other CEOs who could be difficult to deal with also is selling. Live from Cupertino is proof that adding selling to anything you do, you can get from great to superior. And I truly, when I got the rhythm, enjoyed the work of writing the book, and I've enjoyed people's comments. One way, fortunately, they've been all pretty good right now, so I'm pretty happy. And book's doing great on Amazon. So, I'm honored to speak on a show like yours, and it's I hope that it brings something to everyone.
Look,
How's
it's
that?
a perspective that's fresh. There's been lots of books written about Apple, Inside Apple, whatever. But from your perspective, having been there for the many years that you were there, and someone who, did $1 billion in sales? Boy, you must have cashed out quite nicely. So good for you.
Well, I joined Apple to save up enough money to do an album. So now I'm going to go and figure out how to do a really good album. Maybe now that vinyl's back, I'll do a MP3 and an album. So there.
Well, good for you. Go do what your passion is. So I really appreciate it. And people, please pick this up. I know it's doing very well on Amazon. Live from Cupertino, Michael Hageloh, right? Hageloh, sorry.
Hageloh. There you go.
Thank you very, very much for joining us. I appreciate it. Please, everybody, go pick this up. Live from Cupertino. I found it to be a fascinating read, and I really actually learned a lot from you, and that I'm going to apply in my own life. So thank you very much.
Great.
And thanks for signing my book, by the way. I appreciate it. So
yeah,
if you come out
no
to
problem. Have a great one, Deborah.
Thanks.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And if you come out to LA on a book tour, let me know, because I'd love to meet you.
Okay. I'll do it.
All
Thanks.
right. Thank you. And everybody, please pick
Bye-bye.
up this book, Live from Cupertino. I loved it. It was easy to read, but super, super interesting. Plus, some of the inside story was terrific. So thank you very much for joining us. You could find our show on YouTube and Facebook. We post our promos over on Instagram. And, of course, we're on iHeartRadio app. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're pretty much anywhere and everywhere that you get your podcast. So thank you very much for being with us. Deborah Kobylt Live, and we'll see you next time.